The city of Berlin, once the jewel of the German imperial crown, then the birthplace of the first German democracy, and finally the center of power behind the Nazis' ultimate attack on humanity itself. Now, all the pride and splendor that once adorned the largest metropolis of Germany lies in ruins. From the outside, it looks as if Berlin does not have anything left to give.
But that's not true. In the remaining buildings, stowed away in drawers, desks, and safes lies intelligence. Blueprints for weapons, research notes at the forefront of scientific discovery, proof of the Nazi war crimes, and much more. Moreover, Berlin, divided between the Eastern and Western Allies, is on, even behind, the front lines of a new conflict, the Cold War. This is why, right after Berlin has lost any greater significance in the world, it is reborn as a treasure trove of information and intelligence. Berlin becomes the capital of spies.
I'm Astrid Deinhard. Hello, darlings. Welcome back to another episode of Spies and Ties. Today, we'll be talking about the intelligence war that takes off right after the war in Europe ends on May the 8th, 1945.
And I'm Anna Deinhard. Let us begin. As soon as the war is over, the Allies quickly turn into bitter rivals, competing to see who can lay their hands on most of the hidden gems somewhere under all the craters, rubble, and soot that was once Berlin.
Now, they say that the early bird catches the worm, right? And in this case, the early bird has a thick mustache, drinks vodka, and loves hammers and sichels. As you know from Indy's weekly coverage, the Soviets are the first to be in Berlin in force. For roughly 2 months, they had the city more or less to themselves.
And they do not waste this time. For instance, the Forschungslaboratorium für Elektronphysik in Berlin-Lichterfelde is a physics research laboratory headed by renowned German scientist Manfred von Ardenne. By the end of May, everything that is even remotely removable is already on its way east, including the scientist and Ardenne himself.
In a swirl of activity here and elsewhere, the Soviets take possession of machinery, blueprints, and scientists. In part, it's a step in the Soviet effort to recruit German scientists that we covered in our video about Operation Ursula.
Joachim.
There you go.
While effective Soviet intelligence efforts at this point are, shall we say, chaotic.
Yeah.
There is no centrally organized intelligence gathering effort for Berlin. The NKGB, the People's Commissariat for State Security, the Soviet Secret Police, Intelligence and Counterintelligence Agency, set up its base of operation in August in Berlin, Karlshorst, in the former St. Antonius Hospital, later called the Berliner Kremlin.
Next door to the NKGB, there is the GRU.
Oh no, here we go again with the different names of the Soviet intelligence agencies, changing names, areas of responsibility, senior institutions, changing everything more often than a communist mathematician can count.
A communist mathematician?
Yeah, why not?
Why not? Sure. You're right, though. It is confusing, even for the Soviets themselves. The structure and organization of Soviet intelligence services in Germany were so confusing that even Soviet reports were likely to mix up areas of responsibility. The result was that the American side remained completely in the dark when it came to understanding Soviet zones of jurisdiction. Oof.
Brilliant strategy. Confuse yourself and you'll be sure to confuse the enemy. That's the morale of my life. Yes.
Quite right. But that's not the only problem they have. The other is Joseph Stalin, the leader of the USSR. Big problem. Famously wrathful and paranoid, he instilled fears in his minions of the point of making them fail.
There was a problem with Soviet intelligence that became apparent that would recur throughout the Cold War. The reports sent to Moscow did not necessarily respond to reality. Rather, they anticipated what those in the Soviet capital wanted to hear. Nobody wanted to risk conveying bad news, and as a result, there were a number of false and misleading reports.
Anyways, on July 4th, 1945, the undisputed Soviet reign in Berlin ends when the Western Allies take control of their occupation zones.
For the sake of absolute clarity, the city will be divided into 4 occupation zones, just like the country.
The second power to arrive are the French, who arrive on July the 3rd, it was, 1945. The other two, the Brits and the Americans, arrive the day after. So, by July 4, Berlin is under a 4-power rule.
That's called a tetrarchy.
Okay.
I'm just saying. Anyhow, now that the other players are in town, Berlin, and specifically espionage in Berlin, receives a new prerogative, for most at least. Sure, all the German stuff is still terribly exciting for the spies of the Queen, the Kremlin, Uncle Sam, and Marianne. But now, it's also vital to gather information about the soon-to-be former allies.
Moving on. Let's first talk about Uncle Sam. At this point, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which was formed during the war, is still the main American intelligence agency. In 1947, after some detours, the OSS will essentially become the CIA, but that's in the future.
The Americans set up shop in Berlin-Sellendorf, in the Berlin's operations base, BOP for short.
BOP. Right. The Soviets have the Berlin Kremlin, and the Americans have BOP. Anyway, the task is now to find out what the Soviets are up to. But things at BOP are not much less confusing than at the Berlin Kremlin. Little was known about the Soviet Union, still an ally, in the first few years of the occupation. Richard Helms, who would one day become the director of the CIA, was an OSS lieutenant in Berlin in 1945. He would report later that there existed almost no knowledge of Soviet plans. If you came up with a telephone book or a map of an airfield, that was pretty hot stuff, right? Wasn't it?
It definitely was, I guess. Getting information creates a new problem. You see, while everyone pays for information in Berlin, the Americans are unusually generous. And in the destitute ruins of Berlin, a few dollars more can be the difference between near starvation or starvation.
Understandably. So, when the Americans open their wallet, new informants with ever more unbelievable intelligence sprout out of the ground like mushrooms in a humid October forest.
But as the OSS say themselves, they know pretty much jack squat about the Soviets and their activities, which should make telling actual intel from nonsense pretty difficult.
Exactly. Informants who had nothing to offer simply made up information. The more money paid for intelligence, the more worthless it tended to be. Within a few years, a veritable network had come into being dedicated to spreading false information. CIA analysts at that time were hardly able to tell facts from fiction.
Our man Helms will later conclude that at least half of the information contained in the CIA files on the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe was fabricated, and that the CIA stations in Berlin and Vienna had become factories of fake intelligence.
To say that the US efforts are a bit amateurish would be generous. Take this little nugget as an example. The first US-Russian speaking operative only arrives in Berlin in 1947. That's what they said.
Okay.
So, In summary, the Soviets don't have a clear picture because they are afraid of their superiors and confused by their constantly changing complex organization.
The Americans are confused because they buy so much fake intel that they cannot tell truth from fiction. And their people don't even speak or read Russian at first. Maybe the Brits and the French are doing better?
Are they doing better? Well, the French military intelligence agency, the Service de Renseignement, is a bit broken after the turbulences of German occupation and the split between Vichy government and the Free French tore the military apart.
But in 1946, the French Service de Documentation Extérieure et de Contre-Espionnage, SDECE, is founded. The SDECE is not under the military. They reported directly to the French Prime Minister.
The main goal of the French is, like the other powers, capture German technical and scientific knowledge, of course. Unlike the other allies that beefed up their military power during the war, the French are in a hurry to restore the strength of the French army forces. And perhaps as a consequence, unlike the other Western powers, spying on the Soviets seemed not to be really important.
There is yet another feature that sets the French apart from the British and the Americans. The Anglo-Saxons cooperate on policies for intelligence, occupation, foreign relations, the military operations. The French, for a multitude of reasons, don't want this to be a part of this club.
We've covered the problems this creates in several of our legacy specials, and you'll find them linked in the pinned comments.
Inside the Anglo-Saxon cooperation, His Majesty's British Secret Intelligence Service, SIS, is by now known under another name, Military Intelligence Section 6, MI6 in short. Dear editor, play the Bond theme here if we can do that by license purposes.
But the real front line of the intelligence war conducted in Germany was the BCCG. The BCCG is the British Control Council Germany, located in Berlin West End. It is the central governing agency for the British occupied territory in Germany.
Now, in theory, Berlin Kremlin, BOB, the BCCG, and the SDECE are part of a common occupational administration to govern Germany. The Allied Control Commission, also located in Berlin. It has a section dedicated only to Berlin, the Allied Kommandatur.
Cooperation is, as Anna said, the theory. Well, in this time, before digital files and reliable long-range telecommunication, Berlin is a hornet's nest of couriers, agents, operatives, administrators, military officers, private entrepreneurs, and government representatives, scurrying through the fallen city with heaps of documents and information. Some of it the Allies will share. Other parts they each want to keep for themselves, and all of them want to know what the others haven't told them. So in practice, there is already an espionage war being fought in Berlin.
Within that war, the goal of the British are diffuse, as a declassified CIA report calls it, which means they seek scientific and technical information, but also want to spy on the Soviets.
Why is that more diffuse than the Americans or Soviet goals? It's exactly the same. In other words, the only odd man out is the French.
Quelle surprise! But let's move on. The Allies do not solely rely on their own operatives to do the spying. The US quickly employed the Gillen organization for Operation Rusty, led by Oberstleutnant of the Abwehr Hermann Baun, who was responsible for military intelligence operations on the Eastern Front during the war. Operation Rusty uses German agents of the now defunct Abwehr to boost the American intelligence efforts.
The Soviets also employed Germans, mostly communists, that fled east after Hitler rose to power, like Walter Ulbricht. He returns to Germany, although his goals are not directly related to gathering information Ulbricht is supposed to ensure that Berlin stays in line with Stalin's policy and remains in the Soviet sphere of influence.
Essentially, he makes sure that positions in local government are filled with trusted communists. He explains his method as follows. It must look democratic, but we must control everything.
Ulbricht is one of the main characters of yet another piece of the Berlin spy puzzle. Germans spying on Germans. Ulbricht will be instrumental in setting up the Stasi, short for Staatssicherheitsdienst, in the German Democratic Republic, the East German state that will be founded out of the Soviet zone in 1949.
That development will see the Soviet and GDR espionage capabilities used against their own citizens to filter out traitors, saboteurs, spies, and those opposed to the regime.
In the Cold War game of spies, Berlin will continue to be a hotspot of activity. It will be a glowing bed of coals, fanned by the bellows of the new age of intelligence, an age of global espionage giants, where the soon-to-be atomic superpowers will weave their web of intrigue, deceit, manipulation, and death. A tangle of webs that will crisscross the entire world. Follow any thread of those webs, and sooner or later it will take you to Berlin, the capital of spies.
In 6 years of war, the world of espionage has been transformed forever. The atomic age, the space age, the information age, and the digital age will accelerate that transformation. In February, we at Time Ghost will tell you the story of how World War II gave birth to modern espionage in our first feature-length documentary.
We're looking forward to that. Yeah. For now, this concludes our recurring chronological coverage in Spies and Ties for World War II. Anna and I will soon return to cover more thrilling espionage stories in our new Cold War series, War to War, on the Time Ghost channel. Of course, we will also be back here on World War II to revisit the war of espionage in our legacy coverage.
So, if you haven't already, subscribe both to this channel and to the Time Ghost channel. And do consider becoming an agent of the Time Ghost army by joining at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. It is the army that keeps our intelligent efforts going. See what I did there?
I did, sweetheart, I did. And we will see you next time. Darlings. Bye-bye.